I have plumbed deeply into the origins of Christianity and have found very many disturbing things. And also many very confronting things. But most of all, I have decided to look at this in regard to what I say and do all the time. I realized that I was ordained by the church to defend its dogma and its doctrine and explain that doctrine and dogma to people. I find that that is not what I want to do, but rather want to find out what's wrong with that. Yes? Now, it's very difficult to take on an assignment like that, and one might say, if I don't take too much upon myself, it requires a good deal of courage. Now, what I have come to understand is that Christianity is a faith. Isn't that right? Isn't that what we say? The Christian faith? Yes? Islam is also a faith. Buddhism, however, is not a faith. Now, what does this mean? It means that, what is a faith? Faith is believing somebody. That's what it is. Believing what someone tells you. That's faith. Yes? You say, well, it's deeper than that. No, really, it's not. It's believing, accepting in your heart, as it were, what someone tells you about things that you don't understand. Like, quote, God. Yes? And religion, and spirituality, and life. Yes? Buddhism does not propose faith. Buddhism proposes rather knowledge. Now, curiously, if you go into Christianity, you will find there was a great dispute in the origin of Christianity between these two things. And that the Christians of Alexandria were very Buddhist. And I can tell you a real reason why that's so. That they were very Buddhist in their approach to Jesus or to Christianity, whereas the Greeks of Constantinople and Antioch to the north were very Greek in their approach to it. And the Greeks were empire people. And empires are based upon having you believe what they tell you. Are they not? Whereas Alexandria and Buddhism were based upon discovering the knowledge in your own heart. It's called Gnosticism. Gnosis, or gno, appears in the English language as the word know. And as a kid, I always wondered why no was spelled with a K. Kano? Kano. Why is it Kano? You know? Well, the reason is that the word in Greek for knowledge is gnosis, which becomes K in English. And gnosis has to do with knowledge. Knowledge is always very personal. As it is written down, it's someone else's knowledge. Knowledge is only true for you if you really remember what it is. It comes from memory. This has tremendous significance. And there's a lot that I could go into in the background. This takes too much time, but in any event, there was this great dispute between the ones who are called Orthodox who asked you to believe what they told you, and the Gnostics, which asked you to remember it in your heart. And this battle has never ceased, has it? You see? And Christianity has been taken over nowadays completely by orthodoxy. And the Gnostics have been crushed after a battle of thousands of years. But of course, Gnosticism can never be crushed because curiosity arises in the human heart. It can only be assuaged by remembering the truth yourself. Well, what is a master? A master is a master of truth. A master is someone who does remember the truth in their heart. Now let me speak to you the master dialogue. That's what we were promised here. And I believe it's a common denominator of every true master who has ever walked through the streets and byways of the world. This is the common paradigm of a true master. And we might ask, who's yours? First of all, there are certain things that masters never do. And we might be interested to know what they are. Masters never ask you to believe them. What? All masters are Gnostics. They never ask you to believe them. And they never give you commandments. They never tell you what to do. But rather, here's what masters do. They're peripatetic. Now that was a big word in the seminary. Jesus was a peripatetic. Socrates was a peripatetic. Gautama Buddha was a peripatetic. Lao Tzu was a peripatetic. Merlin is a peripatetic. All the masters are peripatetic. What does that mean? They walk around. I mean, being very concrete and simple, they just walk around. And what do they do when they walk around? They encounter other people. That's real simple, isn't it? But masters have very awakened power. And I want to come back to power a lot here. What is power? Power is the ability to elicit human consent. Think about that. Power is the ability to elicit human consent. It is done by two things. Eliciting primal fear or primal ecstasy. Guess which is better?
Ecstasy.
Yes. Ecstasy is at the core of this matter. A word which most religious people are afraid to say and are told not to think about it. And yet all of us know that ecstasy is the most powerful motive of our lives. Right? Now, masters, of course, know this. Masters have telekinetic power. A power to introspect, to look into not only themselves, but others. To look into you and see who you are and where you are and how you're feeling and what you think. This is called compassion by some, is the power to respond within to the actual condition of the other person as it is. We seek people like that in our lives, even though we do not know that we seek them. The most important thing in all of life is hearing. Yes?
Yes. Listening to another, you mean?
Well, listening is trying to hear, isn't it?
Well, it's the same thing. It's
Listening
wanting
is
to hear
trying to-
another. Yeah.
Hearing is actually getting it. Listening is trying to get it. Right?
We meant the same
It's
thing.
a very interesting thing. It's like looking and seeing. Seeing is really seeing it. Looking is trying to see it. You see this?
Yeah.
And the effort is commendable. But the effort without the result is fruitless. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is that hear one another with your hearts. Does that sound like something a master might say? Mm-hmm. You know, and we have it in the words of Jesus, love one another as I have loved you. What does that mean? Hear one another as I have heard you. Listen to the prayer, I call it the prayer of Pocahontas. This is so lighthearted and so innocent and so simple, in which we, with the word God, address God. And our basic thing about God is, God, where are you? Who are you? What are you? Where are you? And so Pocahontas says this, in innocence says, listen, listen. God, please listen until I hear you hearing me. Is that it? Is that what we do? Is that what prayer really is? Well, isn't it? You know? Listen, listen. God, please listen until I hear you hearing me. Isn't that what we say to the people we love? Isn't that what we want from them? We want to hear them hearing us. And when we hear each other hearing, we are well. And all consolation rests in this embrace of hearing and the quiet ecstasy of peacefulness that results in the heart from that communication. Yes? It's very physics stuff. It's very actual. And we do it all the time. Actual. Yeah. Active. Now the master goes around, as I say, peripatetically, and looks into everyone she meets, or he meets, and says, and sees where you are, where the person is. And if they are totally involved in distraction, and altogether too busy about what doesn't matter to pay any attention to what really matters, and isn't that the usual condition?
It is.
Mm-hmm. And to those people who we see as distracted in this way, she or he bows and says, good morning, and passes by. But every once in a while the master encounters someone who is disturbed. Not distracted, but disturbed. And here's the saying of Jesus taken from a gospel the church removed from the Bible because it's Gnostic. Yes? It's the gospel according to Thomas, which we have now found. And this is the first line of the gospel of Thomas. And what I believe is that if we took all of the gospels and burned them, and had only the first line of the gospel of Thomas, it would be enough. It's the really good news. Godspell, gospel, good news. It's the really good news. And Jesus said, not seek and ye shall find, because that's a commandment. And remember, masters never give commandments. Yes? Not seek and ye shall find.
Sorry, I don't understand. Not seek and you what?
Not seek and ye shall find.
Oh, not seek and ye shall find. I'm sorry,
But
I didn't understand.
Stated differently, he who seeks shall find. It's a promise. Yes? He who seeks shall find. But he who finds shall be disturbed. Why? I'm going to quote this little parenthetical quote here. Why disturbed? And this has to be listened to very carefully. Because the truth we discover in our hearts is similar to the truth we were asked to memorize, but never the same. And so you are disturbed. Isn't that the problem? Well, what I have been taught to believe seems right somehow, but there's something missing. Yes, there's something off about this. I don't really get it. Of course, when you remember it in your heart, you get it. See? But when the truth that you remember in your own heart is similar but different than the one you were told to memorize, you go around wrestling with that. You are disturbed. Yes? Mm-hmm. He who seeks shall find, but he who finds shall be disturbed. And he who is disturbed shall wonder. Wonder. Wonder is a mixture of curiosity and ecstasy, isn't it? That's wonderful. It's surprising. It's different. It's a matter for curiosity, and it's ecstatic, pressing up underneath with a promise of something wonderful. Right? He who is disturbed shall wonder. And he who wonders shall find the truth in his own heart and at last become truly human. What? Not an angel? Not a saint? Not something we might wish to be but could never aspire to. But the one thing we all truly do aspire to be truly human, right? Now, the fairy tale that goes with this is one we all know and have all wondered about. It's Pinocchio. The little wooden boy who wanted to be real. Isn't that it? We feel emptiness. I have a saying about emptiness. Let us respond in gratitude to the one of whose fullness we have all received, as we respond in compassion to the many in whose emptiness we share. Isn't that it? What is it to be full? To be full is to be holy. Holiness is wholeness. And when the truth awakens in your heart, the ecstasy fills you with wholeness. And you become holy. But notice that Jesus describes holiness as being truly human.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yes?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
And notice that Jesus does not really indicate anything about sin or guilt in this matter. There's no mention of that at all. Is there? Now, what are the churches always talking about? Have you been saved, sister? Have you been saved, brother? Let Lord Jesus die on the cross for your sins, brother. You are a sinner born. And only Jesus can save you from your sins. Well, you know what? Jesus didn't believe in sin. And says so in the Gospel of Thomas. The disciple in the dialogue asks him, Master, there's the right word. Master, what is sin? Have you ever wondered? Okay. Master, what is sin? And his answer is very brief and short. There is no such a thing. What? But the entire church is based on sin. What do you mean? There is no such a thing. Well, I would hazard this opinion. The definition of sin which we are told by the churches is an offense against God. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's another kind of offense which surely is real, and that is that we offend one another and ourselves, right? These offenses are very much part of life and very important. But you know, it's quite impossible to offend God.
That's true.
It is really quite impossible. Because anyone who can offend anyone else has power over the one that they offend. Did you ever really think about that? If someone can make you angry, they have power over you, and dangerous powers. Isn't that right? Do we have that power over God? Of course not. And that's what Jesus means. There is no such thing as human power to offend the Creator. It cannot happen. But you can, of course, offend yourself, and that's very serious. And you can offend one another, and that is serious as well. But God, you cannot offend. I have a little dialogue which you may ask for as wild as you wish, of a little conversation I have with God about that. It's very amusing, actually, and quite humorous, and very serious indeed. Now, so in any event, the Master looks at you and sees that you are disturbed and says, not just good morning, but good morning, Master. And of course you reply and say, who, me? Right? Who, me? But the church has told me I am unworthy. Master. Yes, Master, the Master says. For morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that put the stars to flight. Good morning, Master. I have come with a question for you. What? You, Master, have a question for me? Yes. Do you remember? Do I remember? Do I remember what? Do you remember that you have the power? The power? What power? Oh, now that you ask me, perhaps I do remember that. Good. The Master says, I would only suggest that you should use it. Goodbye. And as it turns away like Peter Falk, he says, oh, and by the way, if you should have a question as to how to use the power from time to time, call me, or any other master you may prefer, and one of us will come to you in your heart and whisper the answer in your own voice. Have a good day. That's the Master Tao. It's the real one. And that's the format that is traveled and followed by every master in the world. You see, the masters are quite immortal. They are bodhisattvas, as the Buddhists say. And the masters have hung around in the world to be available to those who ask them for help in how to use the power. By the way, what is the best and highest use of the power?
To help others and mankind.
Yes, but it's very specific. and it's almost physical. You see, the thing is, we have two sides to our brain. And modern education only deals with one of them. Religion is supposed to deal with the other. But religion has forgotten about the other, as surely as the government has. And therefore, we do not have education in our society. Left brain and right brain. For the left brain, we need training, which comes from the outside in. For education is for the right brain, which comes from the inside out. Educere, educate, means to draw out of. What does that presume? That you remember within yourself what it is you need to know, but you need help to draw it out so that you recall what you remember. And this is what religious training should do. That all the truth of religion that you find is only important to you if you remember it. Now, that's Gnosticism, you see. This is what the masters, this is the foundation. It's very simple, very obvious, extremely clear, and totally obliterated in the history of the Western world.
Yes.
What? Yes.
Well, that kind of goes back to what you were saying in the beginning about power, which captivated me. I loved your explanation about that, which was about
Eliciting human consent?
that, but the two basic words of primal pain or primal
Ecstasy and primal fear.
Well, it's not a big leap to conclude that religious institutions as well as government and educational institutions have opted for the former because it allows for control.
That's precisely the point.
And the latter, that ecstasy, is incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous to go within and find that there really is something there of much greater worth than what's outside. And when you said forgotten, how to do that, I would challenge that and say it's a deliberate and calculated knowing of obliterating inner knowledge, ecstasy, and anything connected with the numinous, the divine, the
That's right.
deeper aspects that isn't accidental, isn't forgotten.
It's a conspiracy.
Whether we look at it is a calculated conspiracy for several thousand years,
Yes.
I would say.
That's right.
And I hadn't heard anybody bring out that between the power of pain and the power of ecstasy. I really appreciate you.
Yes,
Speaking of that.
yes, that's very good. But I wish to dwell upon your main point for a moment, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
This is precisely the point. All of our religions in the West, at least, Western religion, are based on fear.
Mm-hmm.
And they hold and tantalize you with things about love off in the distance. But the concrete activity is fear and subjugation to the will of others.
And you will find that also in the fundamentalist like Islam has become.
Let me give you George Carlin's routine on this.
Yes.
All right?
Uh-huh.
Now, I know George, and I called him and said, George, you know, you're a pretty good theologian. And he said, thank you. Well, in any event, here's George Carlin's little description of the caricature of God, which we are given by most of our churches. He said, you know who God is, don't ya? Well, God is this white man up in heaven with gray beard and blue eyes, and he's watching you. And he has this book, and he's writing down in it everything that you've done wrong as you go. And when you die, he brings out this book and confronts your spirit and reads everything off that you've done wrong in your lifetime, and he sends you to hell for all eternity. Of course, he loves you.
Because he loves you.
Of course he loves you, you know. Telling yourself, but he loves you. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. That's exactly the contradiction that's involved in this thing. You know. And by the way, what is the love of God is a question which I hope someone will remind me to go into.
Please do.
Very interesting what that is. But anyway, let's stay with this for a minute. Yes, primal fear and primal ecstasy. Now, we have to dwell rather with the word ecstasy. We know a little more about fear. And we know that the major way in which we deal with our primal fear is denial, isn't it? And the basic statement about that is, denial is not a river in Egypt. No. But that's how we deal with our fear. Oh, who, me? I'm not afraid of anything. Liar. Right? Well, anyway. Well, the reason we deny that we have fear is that no one's ever taught us how to deal with it. And the way you deal with fear is to tap your ecstasy. And when your ecstasy comes in, the fear goes out. It's very simple. Things that are holy and sacred, by the way, don't expel the fear. Rather, they balance it with ecstasy in such a way that the ecstasy is just slightly dominant and stays that way, and the fear remains within it, unassuaged, but not dominant. And then you can function. That's really honest, right?
Yes.
And this is the effect of the true sacrament, is to put you in that condition of spirit and mind. Yes? Now,
Say that
balance.
again.
Pardon?
Say that again, would you please?
Yes. The true sacrament awakens in you a balance between your ecstasy and your fear. That makes you experience your ecstasy in such a way that it is slightly dominant over the fear, without extinguishing it. Because truly the just spirit is the one in which they are balanced in that way, with each other. And why is this so? Because you need your fear as well as your ecstasy. Listen to this thing that came to me in India when I was wandering around looking at the history of Buddhism. And we're going to the sacred places where Siddhartha had been. And I found a marvelous painting of a tiger. And when I saw the painting, it was as if the tiger spoke to me and said, imitate the action of the tiger, who, flowing in possession of his power, is still mindful of his fragile life. Isn't that? Imitate the action of the tiger, who, flowing in possession of his power, is still mindful of his fragile life. The mindfulness of fragility is your fear, is it not? But your power is the quiet assurance of the ecstasy of life. Yes? Now, but this is all education. I can sit here and say all of this to you, but it really doesn't do you any good unless you remember it. So, as I'm here, I'm playing the role of master and saying to you, all the time, constantly, not believe this, never that. I never want to say that. Rather, do you remember? Yes? See? Because you are the one that's important to yourself. And anyone who thinks that is not true, you just don't need to associate with them. You know? You just don't. They are not any friend of yours, and they're never going to do you any good. But they could do you a lot of harm. There are people all around, running around, trying to take your power from you, aren't there? And we sell out to such people frequently when we are afraid of the responsibility that freedom brings. Now listen, Because when the ecstasy is dominant in your life, that's freedom. Yes?
Sure.
Listen to the 3 words of the French Revolution, which described the condition of a free human being. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. I translate that freedom, equality, and brother-sisterhood. And I must say it brother-sisterhood, otherwise we miss the point. It's very easy for male dominance under a fear-centered world to take over your consciousness in such a way that you don't realize that your feminine part is just as important as your masculine one. Not more, not less, but equal. Right? Masters prize equality, freedom, and brother-sisterhood, which is hearing one another with your hearts. Yes? That's the American dream, isn't it? Isn't that the thing that's behind what we hear Thomas Jefferson saying? You know? Freedom, equality, brother-sisterhood. Now, I would comment to you, and I'd leave this for future discussion, I suppose, what the contrary dream is that America is now dreaming. You see, we have really forgotten the American dream. We have lost it. And so we wander around frightened and afraid. But what is the American dream? Well, the American dream, I said this at the Bar Association convention to a whole bunch of lawyers. There was someone up there trying to talk to us about ethics. Ethics is a big subject in the law these days. And the lawyers have no idea what ethics are.
That's true.
And neither does anybody else.
You're right.
You know?
The church doesn't.
The church has no idea what ethics are.
And the scholars don't.
No.
The educational system.
Ethics. Ethics. So this lovely little thing, lawyer, who was, you know, some kind of an important figure in the Illinois bar, had come out to teach us about ethics. And this was, of course, not just about ethics, but it was about what ethics is based on. What are ethics? What do you think? And she was in a dialogue asking people questions. What do you think? She would say. And she said, what do you think, said ethics, what do you think lawyers are for? What is their function in society? Good ethical question, right? And so they gave all these answers. And I didn't hear anything I liked much. And so I raised my hand and I said, the lawyer, ideally, is the physician of the body politic. Well, that utterly confused her. She had obviously never heard that before, and neither had anybody else. They were all looking at each other. She said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, ideally the physician, the doctor, is the physician of the body physical, who helps you to maintain your health as a person. The lawyer should be the physician of the body politic, who helps to maintain the health of the nation. Don't you think? Oh, well, and she tried to restate that, and she couldn't even say it back to me. You know? It was so confusing. But it's really very simple, isn't it? That's exactly what a lawyer is supposed to do. Yeah? And all ethics are based on that, aren't they? Ethical conduct is what leads to that function. Well, later on, she asked another question. What do you think is wrong with us lawyers? Why do we have such a bad reputation these days, even among ourselves? Why is it that lawyers have twice as high a rate of alcoholism as the general population? We addressed that quite a bit. And And she said, what's wrong with us? And so they listed a whole bunch of things they thought were wrong. And so I put up my hand again. And I said, Michael Milken. She said, milking? And I said, not milking. Michael Milken. You know, Wall Street. Michael Milken. She said, oh, Michael Milken, yes. What do you mean, Michael Milken? I said, Michael Milken went to Harvard and addressed the Harvard Business School and said, gentlemen, if you would succeed on Wall Street, you must believe greed is a virtue. And she said, oh, no. How many of you think greed is a virtue? And everybody looked at each other. I said, I didn't say that that's what you say, or that's what you think. But I'm saying that's what Michael Milken said. If greed is a virtue, I said, greed is the most capital of all crimes. And if greed is a virtue, then murder isn't a crime. And the end justifies the means, whatever means may be used. This is the dream of America now in charge of this nation. During the last election, everybody got very angry. And that's why. The American dream was officially removed from the agenda. Freedom, equality, and brother, sisterhood. And we dedicated ourselves at the highest level of government to greed is a virtue. Murder is not a crime. And the end justifies the means. You know what that is in European terms? Fascism. Mm-hmm. All right? Now, do we have a problem here? Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting to address this whole group of lawyers and watch them get totally confused and look around at each other, I think some of them may go home and think about it. I hope. Huh? Mm. But all of us have this problem, don't we? We are all constantly into the battle between these views of ourselves and these views of our nation. Yes? Now notice the critical thing when the Master says, good morning, Master. I do that all the time now. I normatively greet people that way. Especially when I first meet them. I do this namaste, and I say, good morning, Master. And they go, who me? And that's exactly what we should all learn to do. Now, this has to do, I was going to say, of using the power, right? The power is remembering the ecstasy in your heart so that it never leaves you. When your ecstasy is with you, what does ecstasy mean, by the way?
Bliss?
Ecstatic. Exhilaration.
Well, let's look at it as a Greek word. Ekstasis. You know ecology, don't you? Mm-hmm. Ecologos. Ecology means the word that comes from outside you. The word that is spoken by the world around you is ecology. Interesting idea. Ecstasis means to stand outside yourself. What? Now there's a meditation for you. You know what that is? It's Zen. What is Zen? Well, I've studied that a lot. And ask any Zen master, they always give you the same answer. Zen is the art of watching yourself watching. Huh? Zen is the art of watching yourself watching. And you should do that because you can. Right? Ecstasy means being in the place where you watch yourself watching. There are two things in the New Testament, two word phrases that appear in the New Testament about that. And no theologians I know understand them at all. And there are two terms that are applied to Jesus, in which he is called and calls himself sometimes the Son of God and other times the Son of Man. Do you ever wonder about that? What's the difference? Well, one of them is the watcher and the other one is the one being watched. The Son of Man is Pinocchio when he's still a piece of wood. The Son of God is Pinocchio when he becomes truly human. But these two personages are in us all the time. They're both us. The one that is innocent and powerful, and the one that is frightened and disempowered. Yes? Now, this runs across all sorts of boundaries. But what do we get there with? Ecstasy. Ecstasy is Zen. It's watching yourself watching. It's looking at yourself and seeing where you are. It's looking at yourself and saying, "Good morning, Master." It's looking at yourself in the mirror in the morning. I recommend it. Look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, "Good morning, Master," and see what happens. You go, I mean, really, it's a tremendous moment of truth. Who is that? Me? You know? I mean, this is really powerful spiritual practice. But now, let's go in to what happens when the Master wakens up in you. And when the Master wakens up in you, it isn't the left brain where he wakens, or she. By the way, it isn't either he or she. You see, I've made up a word for this, because there aren't any words in the language for it. Though there are words that approach it. And here's a word, a real thing like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, right? And here's the word, androhermophrogynous. Androhermophrogynous. United bipolarity, in which the male and the female are aspects of the same reality. Right? Yes? We are androhermophrogynous beings. And we should not allow ourselves to subjugate the one to the other. Yes?
Okay.
And all of our society is all about the one running the other one. Well, forget that. That's not freedom. That's not holiness. And that is not happiness either. Happiness is acknowledging that all of us, it's all in you. All of it. And learning how to live with yourself is living at peace and ecstasy with your both male and female side. The French say it very well, don't they? You know the old saying in French. C'est peu la différence entre l'homme et la femme. Mais vive la différence, which is to say, there is very little difference between a man and a woman. May the difference live. Okay? That's very good. And very profound, actually. As well as very pragmatic. Now, in any event, this ecstatic power is in the left, not the left brain, but the right one. Now, as between masculine and feminine, the left brain is masculine, and the right brain is feminine. Yes? The right brain is where the spiritual aspects function, in the fey qualities of telekinetic and telepathic communication. And is that ever the power? Oh, yes it is. Now, here's what Lao Tzu has to say. I think. I sometimes feel that some of these masters, I hear them speak in me. I'm sure it's just me speaking to myself, but nevertheless, I hear it as it were the voice of Lao Tzu. And this is what Lao Tzu says. And he even affects a little Chinese accent. You know? He says, left brain is concerned for origin of universe, of what it may be composed and how to control it. Right brain is concerned for happiness and how it may be obtained. Corpus callosum is bridge between them. Bridge of sighs over troubled water, in which dwells dragon of suffering. And isn't that it? You see? Isn't that it? Now, it's how to get over the bridge without the dragon biting you. Now, Lao Tzu would surely have loved to say that if he had known about the left and right brain. And he might even have said it anyway. But anyway, whether he did or not. That is Taoism. Now, what is the power? The power is mentioned and described very well, of all places, in the Old Testament. The Bible contains a great deal of very valuable stuff. And if you sift out the control mechanisms, it turns out to be very useful and helps you remember and tells you what you might do if you wish. But as long as you take it as a control mechanism which orders you around and tells you to worship God and forget it, and to be obedient, for heaven's sake, obedience is exactly the wrong thing. There are two things. There's obedience and there's allegiance. Obedience is doing what you're told. Allegiance is being bonded to another who is your equal. Obedience is about subordination. Allegiance is about freedom. Guess which one is best? All of our lives should be involved in the wonders of allegiance. And we should flee from either imposing or submitting ourselves to obedience as quickly as possible. Now, masters don't believe in obedience. I was ordained by a bishop, of course, and in 1964, 1,000 years ago. And the bishop came to me, and I loved this bishop. He was a wonderful man, he really was. And if he were alive today, I would have no trouble having him be right here with us and hear all of that and agree. But in those days, of course, I didn't know any of this at all. And of course, neither did he. But nevertheless, he ordained me. And he said to me before he put his hands on my head in Latin, "Promittis mihi obedientiam." Do you promise me obedience? And by the way, promittis is the familiar form of the word you, not the formal form. So that he is addressing me as a child. Yes? And saying, "My child, do you promise me obedience?" Well, I said, promitto, which means I promise. I'm awfully sorry, Bishop, I wouldn't do it again, right? But I did it then because I was too confused, didn't understand much. Promittis mihi obedient. You promise me obedience. Well, of course, you promise to be my slave. That's what that is. The gladiator standing in the Roman arena. "Hail Caesar! We who are about to die, salute you! We lay down our life, Caesar, for your entertainment." Yes? I mean, you talk about the abject bottom of slavery. Look at that. Sounds like a moment of glory, but it's utterly a moment of degradation. How interesting. Now, so anyway, promittis mihi obedientiam. The promise that the bishop should have asked was, promittis mihi allegientiam. do you promise me allegiance? And to this very day I would willingly answer yes. Right? Well, in any event, the masters, you see, never ask for obedience, but are pleased if you offer them allegiance. Yes. But they will only relate to you as an equal. And if you try to make them your superior, they'll run away. Oh, really? Yes. Now, this all makes some kind of sense, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But what is this power in the Old Testament? What have you used the power? Well, here are the instructions, and if you want me to, I can give you a lovely story from the Old Testament that carries it out perfectly. But anyway, here's the statement. Bless, and do not curse. For by what blessing you bless, you shall be blessed. And by what cursing you curse, you shall be cursed. And therefore bless, and do not curse, because that you may truly become the blessing in the land that has been given to you. There it is. That's the instruction manual on how to use the power. That's very, very simple. But it has never been practiced. And both parts of it are equally important. Bless, not curse. Because you may use the power to do either. Why would you curse someone? In order to profit from them in some way. Why would you bless someone? In order to make them experience their masterhood and set them free. Do we know the difference between blessing and cursing? Well, let me tell you something about blessing and cursing. It is not just a nice wish. Blessing and cursing are very serious business, and things happen when you do them. Why did they happen? How many people here, may I ask, have ever heard of the 100th monkey? Mm-hmm. You have?
Oh, yes.
Good. You have? Yes? Anybody else? You've heard of the 100th monkey? All right. The phrase that I'm about to introduce to you is 100th monkey internet. Let's get right current with the technology. The 100th monkey internet. When people ask me, and I'll tell you the story in a minute, people ask me, what do you think about the internet? And I said, well, it's very good, but it's a little bit inferior to the one we've always had. What do you mean by that? Well, we have all been on the 100th monkey internet all this time, and I think it would be, in addition to using the internet, we should get to use that one, because it's quicker and more economical. Now, let us understand what it is. And here's the proof. There are these islands off Japan. And they all have monkeys on them. Now how the monkeys got there, nobody knows. They've been there forever. And Japanese fishermen have moved in and set up camp and used the island for a base to go fishing. But they like the monkeys, you know, and so they feed them. And they've learned that there's one thing that's a perfect diet. Be interested to know what that is? It's a sweet potato. And every day, they throw the sweet potatoes out on the sand for just exactly the right number of monkeys, which they count regularly. And the monkeys go pick out the sweet potato, eat them sand and all, right? Well, one day, it was observed that one of the sweet potatoes fell in a tide pool. And one female monkey didn't get her sweet potato. And she was sitting on the edge of the tide pool, looking at her sweet potato, and trying to figure out how to get hold of it without a reach. Finally, bright idea. She reached in the water and pulled the water toward her. And sure enough, the sweet potato drifted over and she picked it up and started to eat it. But she was observed eating it, she went, no sand. Sweet potatoes are much more delicious without sand. And so, she kept, the next day, her sweet potato fell in the sand, she picked it up and threw it in the flagpole. Smart monkey. And another female monkey began to watch her for several days, very curiously, monkey see, monkey do. And finally, she took her sweet potato and threw it in the tide pool. And she was hooked immediately. And then little by little, all the monkeys began to experiment with that thing, and they were always hooked right away. And when the number of monkeys reached about 30%, and that's very important for a lot of reasons, when it reached about 30% of the whole population, the next morning, all the monkeys washed their sweet potato. Bam! Just like that. But that wasn't the wonder. The wonder was that all the monkeys of all the islands, separated by hundreds of miles, began to wash their sweet potato on the same morning. That's what happened. This is a very well verified incident. That's the 100th monkey internet, see? Telepathic communication between the brains of the monkeys. Do you think perhaps that telepathic communication is a matter we should be studying? Well, if you don't think so, the government does. The Russians are way ahead of us in this research. At Akademgorodok, on the river Ob in Siberia near Novosibirsk, they are way ahead of us in the use of telekinetic power. Now notice these two words, telepathic and telekinetic. Telepathic is receiving the signal. Telekinetic is sending it out. In this term, what is the blessing? It's a telekinetic message sent to another human being to awaken in them their power. Can you think of a greater blessing than that? Right? A fellow called me the other day from Minneapolis. I get calls from everywhere. Australia, South America, India, everywhere. And this day it was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And his name is Steve Dusak. And Steve is one of your CEOs. You know, he's one of those big guys that does corporations back in Minnesota. And he came out to the gathering I had up in Berkeley, and he's been calling me ever since. And he's a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic. See? Now, I always say that my principle, my mission in life is to recovering Catholics. You know, you've heard of recovering alcoholics? Well, that's easy compared to being a recovering Catholic. You know? Because Catholicism as we have it, and Christianity as we have it, is surely an addiction. Right? Now, however, it isn't bad. It's just that it's used wrongly. It isn't that Jesus isn't a real master. Jesus, I am fairly sure, because I have conversations with him occasionally, is a real master, but not a master of slaves. Right? Now, here's what Steve said. He said, Father Charlie, he said, I got to tell you something. I said, yes, Steve, what? And he says, well, this colleague of mine came in the other day and said, Steve, I'm praying for you. Well, that's the first come on, you know. And Steve said, well, good, I could use any prayers I can get. That's the proper answer. And so the guy immediately thought he had him, and he says, do you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins? And Steve said, well, no. He said, I don't really believe that. And the guy got furious. Oh, he just went into a rage, you know. I mean, And after he quieted down, Steve just sat there and let him go through it. He knew he would do that, and he went through it. And finally, he said to the guy, after he calmed down, he said, who wrote the Bible anyway? And the guy said, men inspired by God. And Steve said, you mean those liars, Peter and Paul? Peter and Paul are liars, you know. guy goes, and walked away. Sounds like the end of the thing, doesn't it? No, it's not. Let me tell you the story, the real story of what Jesus did and who Jesus was. Jesus is a poor boy from Galilee who had a vision of the chariot of fire. Have you heard of the chariot of fire?
Mm-hmm. Elijah.
Elijah?
Yeah, Elijah. Chariot of fire. The description of the chariot, however, that Elijah rode to heaven in, is given by Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel, there's this description of this fiery chariot, this Merkabah, angelic vehicle, with eyes all around, seeing in all the directions, and going equally in all directions, all at once, and being something like a gyroscope, going in all these rotating, and being able to, lift off and be everywhere at once. And in the middle of it is a terrible crystal, a sapphire crystal. And that is the description of the God of Israel by Ezekiel. It's the only one in the Bible. It's the chariot of fire. This is modeled after the Assyrian war chariot, which had 4 horsemen, like the Apocalypse, and which had 4 riders who looked in all 4 directions with their spears. And these chariots in the sunlight were so brightly shining that they blinded everyone who looked at them. And they would ride out with their terrible side wheels and their spears and slaughter people by the thousands. And they were the mode by which Assyria conquered the world, including the northern tribes of Israel. And Ezekiel, during the Babylonian captivity, saw the vision of the Merkabah as being that heavenly vehicle after which the Assyrian chariot was modeled. Eh? And you know the song as it goes? William Blake? Give me my spear. Well, let's see, how does it go? Give me my spear of burning gold. Give me my arrows of desire. No, not quite. Yeah, another thing. And give me my spear. O clouds unfold. Give me my chariots of fire. That's where we get it. There was a movie out like that, wasn't it? Chariots of Fire. And it was about a minister, wasn't it? All right. And this is the thing is that in Israel at the time of Jesus, a prophet was known by having that vision as a child. And Jesus had that vision as a child, and therefore was regarded as a true prophet in Israel by the high priests of the temple in Jerusalem. Why haven't they told us this? Well, anyway. Jesus, however, was crucified not for your sins. Jesus died for the nation of Israel. It is expedient that one man should die